So welcome, Amit Ahuja from Adobe. So we were just chatting about how, one of the things we love about DMS, us, but we hear from others, is just the serendipity aspect of it. Like, I know who's coming because we created the invite list, but it still surprises me when I see something. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't seen you for years. What's been interesting from Amit is a number of things. One, the morning session we talked to Rob Tarkoff mentioned that he actually ran Corp Dev. So there's a connection there. Amit worked for Rob many years ago, and there's many others in the room here. So
I think I have 14 ex-bosses. DK is sitting there right there. I don't know. I think Rob Tarkoff left, but I've worked for a lot of people here. Yeah. They all tried to fire me, I'm sure too. That's probably the worst part.
So Amit basically was born into Adobe. It's been 18 years, but he was like me. He was a Corp Dev guy who actually migrated over to the operations side. So now he leads all of product for the digital experience business. So the base question is like, how do you do that? How do you go from being a Corp Dev guy to an operator?
You're making Corp Dev sound so great, by the way. No. So I was joking. I think I literally know a vast majority of people in this room, and it's so great to see everyone. So first of all, thank you for having me, and it is absolutely incredible to see everyone in person. To your point, I started in Macromedia as an intern in Corp Dev. So this is 2004 as an intern from business school. I was an intern there doing actually M&A work, which, we weren't doing that much, but the whole idea was go look at deals, do some biz dev stuff and all that. And it's actually a funny story, speaking of 18 years, because I was an intern, I went back to grad school, and came back, and Adobe bought us. It was pretty quickly thereafter. And I still remember sitting down with someone and being like, this sucks. I'm going to be here 6 months, max. I joined Macromedia because we were small, and it's this really cool, hip company, and here comes Adobe, and I will be here 6 months, and here I am 18 years later. So clearly, I have no foresight into any of that. But it's been incredible. And 8 years, and it's where you and I got to spend a lot of time together. 8 years, we're doing M&A work, doing biz dev work. We actually, for folks who don't know, we do venture equity work as well, so that was part of my job for 8 years. And the fun part for me, what we now call Experience Cloud, I was on the M&A side of that. So it started with you. It started with Omniture. I saw Vrol, I don't know if he's here. There's a bunch of, Asim is here. There's a bunch of Omniture people here. And that's where this whole journey started on kind of this Experience Cloud path. And for me to answer your question about Corp Dev, I love Corp Dev, right? I think just the ability to kind of go out, meet, understand different tech trends, talk to different people, and really have that strategic point of view of what's happening from a landscape point of view was like the highlight. I absolutely loved it. But I think you knew this, I always had kind of a desire to go and say, hey, can I actually go run something, right? It's one thing to sit there, and I've learned to kind of ask questions around, hey, why is this margin this, and why is that? And I think I was decently good at that, but I kind of had this burning sensation inside of me being like, I think it'd be really fun one day to be on the other side of that table and run that P&L and take accountability and look at it from the other side of the table. So that's what kind of drove me. And actually, the gentleman that's here, Mr. David Karnstedt, I give him all the credit in the world. So we bought his company, Official Frontier. It was our big foray after Omniture to get into the advertising space, and bought the company. And I was lucky enough to work with DK. And he was the one, legitimately, I'm not making this up. He said, hey, how long are you gonna be this Corp Dev thing? I'm like, oh, Corp Dev is great, but I kind of stare. And he came to me one day. He's like, hey, you're out of Corp Dev. You're gonna come work for me. And so I hopped over with him. It was my first operational role within Adobe. I will not bore you on the 10 years post that, all the different roles between kind of partner groups and all that, but my desire was always kind of link the market strategy side of Corp Dev to product strategy. That's where I actually really enjoy and I actually have fun. And even when I was doing the M&A work, to me it's all about what are you actually building and what does that actually mean for the customer. Now being on this side of the table, it's been incredible, right? We have a very big portfolio. We can talk about it as much as we want, but the whole idea is it's not dissimilar. Like, hey, are we helping our customers? What value are we providing, and where do we need to go? And so I think that's a little bit of the lens that I'm bringing to the product team. But it's been a blast.
Awesome. That actually reminded me a little bit of my story, but mine got truncated. So, like Asim Vrol will remember this, at Omniture we were going to do a reorg from a functional organization to a GM organization.
I remember that too. Yeah.
I was going to be a GM, but then you guys bought us. So. No
more
reorg, and so therefore LUMA.
That was my fault.
So
yeah. Sorry, Terry.
Very good. So want to dive into Adobe and what you do. So There was a great panel on the customer digital experience. Lonnie was awesome, who leads the business, the content business at Adobe. And that's really the angle that Adobe has been going after for quite some time.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the kind of content-centric approach to the way you go to market and differentiate?
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat. Lonnie is 1,000 times smarter in this than me and probably did a much better job than me, so I will not repeat what she said. Maybe I'll take just a 2-second step back and kind of what we've assembled and what we've built. At the end of the day, our fundamental belief is that every brand in the world, whether you're B2C, and I think we can maybe talk a lot about B2B as much as you want to, B2B, any geo, any vertical, everybody's fundamentally trying to figure out how do you provide a better customer experience. And I'm not saying anything rocket science. Everybody knows that. There's across your LUMAscape, I think everybody's saying that hey, here's a platform to go build a digital experience. I think what Adobe has done, dating back to literally start with Omniture, is this perspective that says, hey, to do that in a very intelligent and a forward-looking way, you need a couple very core things. Number one is you need a data foundation. Right? And there's a lot of amazing companies here in the audience, and I just talked to a few of the CEOs who are doing amazing work by basically saying, hey, how do I go build a very solid data foundation, especially in the world of what's happening around cookies and privacy, and we can talk a lot about that as well. So one part of it is the data foundation. I think the perspective that Adobe has brought to this, though, is not you don't need just data to provide an experience, you need content to provide an experience. And our whole idea is how do you marry up the data signals and the data foundation to the content signals, the content foundation, to provide that experience. And the chart, and Brian, you get a kick out of this, the chart that we've used for 10 years to really show this to our customers and when we talk is, it's literally that simple. It's here's data, here's content, and then there's a notion of how do you assemble it with intelligence, right? And this whole notion of AI ML, we can talk about that as well, but it really boils down to that. And I think where Adobe's approaching it, from a unique perspective, given the whole other side of Adobe is, hey, how can we help really make that content side work more in harmony with the data? So there's a lot of pieces that we think about that. One is there's a notion we've been talking a lot recently around what we call content supply chain. So if you have all the data in the world and you have amazing capability to go to this notion of segment of one and one-to-one personalization, well, that's great. You might have all the data, but how do you actually have all the different copy and all the different content to be able to do that? Well, we call it content supply chain. How do we fundamentally go all the way from point of creativity, which, by the way, happens a lot in the Adobe tooling, to say, hey, I want to go create a campaign, I want dynamic assets, and I want to be able to now feed that really quickly directly out to execution for that level of targeting, right? And if you can do that, then you're truly paying off this notion of personalization. It's what we call personalization at scale. The very simple concept is I want to treat you differently, they want to treat you differently, and I need to be able to do that not only through the data side, but also represent that through content. So that's what a lot of what we're doing from a content side is, hey, how do we do that assembly? And a lot of things that, again, I wasn't here for Lonnie's presentation, she might have talked about is, again, in the same world of data, how do you bring intelligence to that as well? How do we help you understand, hey, I've used content types A, B, C, and D. How does the customer respond to those? Where do I think they will respond to those? And this notion of bringing content and data together in a way that you can interpret those signals and then fundamentally start actually providing recommendations. Hey, you're trying to do a campaign for X. You're trying to reach these different type of people. Hey, let me proactively tell you, these are the different types of content you should use. Hey, you want to go do increased segmentation. Did you know that this segment has actually responded really well to these different people from this type of content? So we see a huge opportunity. We see customers really responding to it. And one thing I would say is, especially right now, given the macro economy, the number one question I'm getting is how do we become more efficient? I think 2 years ago, I'd walk in and talk to customers. It was much more about top line growth, digital transformation. It still is, but the lens has honestly changed, right?
And since obviously, and talked a little bit about this with Rob, I know you weren't here then,
Yep.
but the kind of full stack approach versus best of breed, and kind of what made there is most people here would argue the best of breed.
Yep.
Obviously, you guys have the dominant, content management platform, Experience Manager. There's a lot of other CDPs here. You have your CDP, but how do you pitch and go to market? Is it you need this full stack, or what's the story?
I think sometimes these topics become more religious in the industry than they really are, if I'm being very, very blunt and honest. Our story is actually very, very simple. We've built a series of what we consider best-in-class assets, where I think the step we've taken over the last 5 to 6 years is we've made a massive investment around how to integrate those and bring them together. We call it Adobe Experience Platform. How do we bring those together? The first thing I will say to customers, and Lonnie hears me say this way too often in our customer briefing center, but it's the absolute truth. There is no such thing as only Adobe within any company. It just doesn't exist. Like, as much as I would love it, our stock price would, I'm sure everybody, Adobe would love it. It doesn't exist. So my job as the product strategy and thinking about where product needs to go is everybody fundamentally, especially when you talk about enterprise, has a heterogeneous environment. Full stop. So my question, what I get asked myself and which I ask my team all the time, is how do we fit into that? Now, our approach fundamentally is, hey, we might have an asset here, we might have an asset here, we might have an asset here. There's zero part of that I ever walk in and say, hey, great news, here's your answer to all your problems, take this whole thing, you have to buy everything together. In fact, it's the opposite. We literally look and say, what's your pain point? Okay, you might have a pain point in commerce. Here's how we might be able to help, and that might be a commerce-first discussion. You might have a pain point around, to your point, the data foundation. Let's start with a CDP conversation. Where it leads to for us is typically from there where we like to say, and I think it's the truth, is, hey, if you're using this part of our stack, here's how it integrates in, right? And here's the unique value that you might get by using, for example, analytics and commerce together. I can actually show you exactly what's happening over here. I can show you analytics. I can show you commerce. The data matches up, all of that. But 1,000% of our message, right, is 100% if you maybe built something in-house. You might be using a tool from a provider here. That's awesome, right? We have focused a lot on extensibility on the API integration layer. Here's how we integrate into that. And if you decide that we are the best of breed for that potential application, that's fantastic, right? Love to talk about that. But that is very much how we approach it with this kind of API-first, integration-first mindset. And of course, we like to demonstrate and show value. That, to me, is all of the proof in the pudding to say, hey, if you're using these things together, ideally it provides incremental value. But that's how the conversation goes.
So I think most people think of Adobe as providing tools for B2C.
Yeah.
We have talked about B2B marketing and sales tech, and really the shift to digital selling over the pandemic that's really persisted. You guys obviously acquired a leading platform with Marketo now years ago. How does that integrate? Is it like a totally separate story? Is it tell us about Marketo and B2B?
No, it's a great question. I think from if you again take a little bit of a strategic step back, the same notion of digital transformation of what B2C companies are doing, I would argue the same level of digital transformation is happening on the B2B, even to your point, in a different way, but still massive opportunity. And the interesting thing also, I would say, Brian, is that it's funny. I used to think B2B and B2C, 70% of the companies I walk into and potential customers, existing customers, actually are hybrid, right? Name a bank, right? You have a B2C part, you have a wholesale part. Name a retail thing. I have a B2C part, I have a B2B part. So our unique perspective on this, I think, is, hey, I don't necessarily come in and say, you're B2C, let me tell you everything that's going on in B2C, you're B2B, everything B2B. I think a lot of these companies are really trying to figure out how do they understand technology and a platform to bring these things together. I think that's point number one. Point number two is the idea of what we do from B2B and a digital transformation story, again, is exactly what I said at the very beginning. We like to overcomplicate things, but it's not that hard, right? There's a data foundation, there's a content foundation, you want to provide an experience. We bought Marketo, to your point, which is still doing incredibly well in the lead automation space. What we've done, to your point about kind of is that sitting on an island, we've really taken that as the flagship asset and built around that. So the notion of what we do from a CDP, and again, I think that's a little bit of an overloaded term, but what we did is we took the core CDP infrastructure and we effectively said we want to make B2B a first-class citizen on the same platform. So what does that mean? That means all the data schema. I'm going to go take all the schema and think about what does that mean from a B2B point of view. In B2C, it might be a sale, and B2B, it might be opportunity. I want to go create all the different endpoints and touch points from a B2B point of view. Hey, I might want to go find people on LinkedIn. I might want to find people elsewhere. And most importantly, how do you think about identity from a B2C and B2B point of view? And we brought in a whole different notion of, hey, I understand you from a consumer point of view, but I also understand you from a buying group and an account point of view, which is the core of B2B. So what we've done is we've taken this flagship asset around Marketo, really thought about what is the next level of infrastructure. We built a B2B CDP around it. And now we're really seeing, Brian, to your point, is how do we help you around not just that, but the convergence of sales and marketing. So what we're seeing a lot is customers coming to us saying, hey, Adobe, I want to use you. I want for the marketing part, but you know what? I want a chatbot interface. I want to do dynamic chat now over here. I want to do dynamic chat over here. You know what? I want to take the same marketing signals and I want to put it in the hand of my SDR and BDR so that they can go reach out. So that's really how we're thinking about it, as a notion of convergence. And again, if people are using other tools for that, great. We'll take the data signals, we'll take the content, we can deposit that where you want it. But we're seeing more and more people coming to Adobe is, hey, I want that notion of hybrid on one platform. And I also want the ability not to take all this marketing data and help me make sense of these other channels as well. And that's really what we're doing around B2B.
So you mentioned identity. How do you approach identity? Is it a partner approach? Is it an internal? What is the approach?
Yeah, so obviously that world continues to change and changes on a very regular basis. Our approach, which I would say has been very consistent for the last X many years, and even before I was in this role, I used to run the DMP world, which I would argue, DMP product at Adobe, which I would argue was kind of the predecessor in the cookie-based world, and how do you think about identity and stitching? In that world and in the CDP world, with the DMP being kind of more third-party cookie-oriented, with obviously CDP but more first-party oriented, the approach has been the same. We are a software platform provider. So in that, what we do is we provide tools and technology for if you bring your data in, we will help you link that data up, right? So we have logic that will say, okay, this is person A, this is person B. I can do that deterministically. I have logic that can say I can even provide that on a fuzzy basis and a probabilistic basis. What we also do is say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we also understand that you don't have all that data, nor does Adobe provide that data by ourselves. We're not a data provider. But hey, you want to use provider A, B, C. We have tools and technology built to integrate those graphs in. So it is very much here is a platform approach, Brian, to answer your question, but it is also 100% we want to partner with all the different data providers and be able to bring in that augmented sense of identity, which we normally see around kind of media expansion, user expansion use cases. And we will work with, name your data provider, but the whole idea is how to provide that platform. And our view is it gives the customer the control, right? To say, hey, here's where I'm using Adobe, here's the different data sets, but hey, I want to use these data sets. And a lot of what we've done is provide that governance around the system. So that data comes in from provider A, that data comes in from provider B. Hey, you can't actually use some of these things together. It's not that sexy, but we spend a lot of time at the platform layer thinking about that. But we have partnerships with the vast majority of the data providers out there, and that's going to be our approach going forward.
Great. I know we only have a few seconds left, so just wanted to ask, what are you most excited about as far as coming out from an Adobe product perspective in the next quarter or 2 quarters?
I think that's a good question. The way I think about it strategically, I think in the world of what we've done, and again, a lot of folks in this room, and I give all the credit in the room to the folks in this industry, and people like say are competing with Salesforce, Oracle, with Rob. I think it's amazing. I look at the level of innovation that people have put together, and I love seeing it, right? So I love that the bar continues to get raised. My thesis to you, Brian, on kind of where I get excited is I would argue a lot of the data foundation is being laid. A lot of the content foundation is being laid. I think the basis of differentiation and where you're going to see a whole level of explosion is around who can now do that with the notion of a whole different level of intelligence going forward. Meaning, how do I actually take all these massive amount of data signals? How do I bring that level of intelligence, whether that's on the content side, about generative technology or that, whether it's on the data side, but fundamentally that decisioning and intelligence is where I think everything is going to start moving to, and we've got a huge amount of innovation there, and that's what excites me for the next kind of 3, 5, 10 years. I think that's where it's all going to go.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. Really appreciate you coming by.
My pleasure.